The conventional view is that Mike Bloomberg's late entry into the 2020 race will hamper his ability to win the Democratic nomination because, after all, he's not competing in the first 4 states. I see something different, that maybe he's made a wise political calculation and that the dominoes are falling as he needs them to. I said on my Sirius XM radio program this week that if you could put Bloomberg in a time machine and let him start the race sooner, I don't think he'd take that deal. To be sure, his approach has met with skepticism. As the New York Times recently put it, quote, "There's a way that people generally run for president, and there is whatever Mr. Bloomberg is doing, looking past Iowa and New Hampshire to focus on the delegate-rich contests that come in the months that follow. Mr. Bloomberg is betting that his zag while they zig electoral strategy and functionally bottomless resources can make him the standard bearer of a Democratic Party whose 2020 primary has been defined in part by progressive disdain for the billionaire class." The Times piece implicitly criticized Bloomberg using those deep pockets to buy a lot of ads while skipping a lot of the grunt work of running, the debates, the large-scale rallies, the posing for selfies with hundreds of voters. But maybe it's not his indifference or an unwillingness to engage in retail politics that kept him out of the early contests, but game theory. A bit of history. Like Donald Trump before him, Mike Bloomberg long flirted with running for president before actually becoming a candidate. And like Donald Trump, he's never had a doctrinaire devotion to a particular political party. Remember, before running against Hillary in 2016, Donald Trump had been a contributor of hers. Bloomberg had been a Democrat before switching to run for New York City mayor in 2001 as a Republican. In 2007, he announced that he was no longer affiliated with either party, a move that many thought was a prelude to an independent run for president. And that suspicion lasted nearly a decade. Then in March of 2016, he ended speculation that he would run as an independent by writing this editorial: "The risk I will not take. An independent candidacy could split the Electoral College and allow Congress to elect an extremist." Yet he also attacked candidate Donald Trump at the time, saying he has run the most divisive and demagogic presidential campaign I can remember, preying on people's prejudices and fears. And then he delivered a fiery anti-Trump speech at the 2016 Democratic National Convention. In 2018, he switched his affiliation back to Democrat and donated millions to midterm candidates, launching speculation that he would run as a Democrat. Still, many wondered yet again if he'd run as an independent. So he squashed those rumors once and for all. Mike Bloomberg has always been about the numbers. In fact, his current slogan is, "In God we trust, everybody else bring data." And that was his view of the presidential race as an independent 1 year ago, when he released a statement saying this: "The data was very clear and very consistent. Given the strong pull of partisanship and the realities of the Electoral College system, there is no way an independent can win. That is truer today than ever before." In 2020, the great likelihood is that an independent would just split the anti-Trump vote and end up re-electing the president. That's a risk I refused to run in 2016, and we can't afford to run it now. So did that mean that he would run as a Democrat? No, because in March, he announced he was definitely not running in 2020. And by now, everybody else was getting into the race, and the debates were about to begin. But then on November 7th, the New York Times broke the news that Bloomberg, quote, "has been privately weighing a bid for the White House for weeks and has not yet made a final decision on whether to run." The story said, quote, "Mr. Bloomberg, 77, initially bowed out of the 2020 race because of Mr. Biden's apparent strength, but he has since grown skeptical that Mr. Biden is on track to win the Democratic nomination, and he does not see the 2 leading liberals in the race, Senators Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and Bernie Sanders of Vermont, as strong candidates for the general election." The very next day, he filed paperwork for the Alabama primary just before its deadline, which is the earliest in the nation. He finally announced his candidacy on November 24th. Some say that his bid is all about the money, that he's buying his way in. I say if he didn't have credibility, that alone wouldn't work. It's not just the money. He's a qualified guy with a record of accomplishment behind him. Yes, he risks alienating the voters in the early contests that he has skipped, but his response to those Democrats is to say that he's opening his wallet in nationwide advertising including in their states, to take down Donald Trump. Consider that Bloomberg just committed to run an ad during the Super Bowl at a cost of $10 million. The only other candidate to make that kind of buy? Donald Trump. So here is Bloomberg's play. We're less than a month from Iowa with no clear frontrunner. Then comes New Hampshire, equally competitive, followed by Nevada and South Carolina, where Joe Biden, due to his standing among people of color, is in the lead. Of course, there could be a momentum shift in the race depending upon who wins Iowa and New Hampshire. But it's entirely possible that the first 4 states could yield 3 different winners, and that the picture will be muddled. On March 3rd, when we have Super Tuesday, a day on which 14 states will vote, including California and Texas, at the end of which roughly 40% of Democratic delegates will have been selected. And that's the day that Mike Bloomberg enters the fray. He's currently spending at a rate that by Super Tuesday could equal the $400 million that President Barack Obama's campaign spent on advertising over the course of the entire general election in 2012. Could it work? Well, a Hill-Harris X poll released last week showed him tied for 3rd place with Senator Elizabeth Warren. And on Friday, Real Clear Politics reported that in its betting odds, Mike Bloomberg has now passed Pete Buttigieg for 4th place, and that if the upward trend continues, he'll soon be moving into 3rd place ahead of Warren. My bottom line is this: I am not predicting that Mike Bloomberg wins the Democratic nomination, but I do believe he is about to have a significant impact on this race.